What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome to another Pioneer video, and today we're going to be taking a look at a new deck. Well, maybe not new to some people, but new to me because I'd seen this kind of floating around, and I've seen like other Neoform type decks and they're usually like pretty gimmicky, but this one might actually be pretty decent. So today we're going to be taking a look at it's labeled Sultai combo, but it's like Atraxa Neoform combo for the Pioneer format. Of course, before we get too deep into it, if you are finding this video and you are not subscribed to the channel, you should consider doing so and ring the notification bell as well. That way, you know when I post Pioneer videos, when I post modern videos, and other essay type videos. And if you go to the description of this video, you'll find two links. One goes to my Discord server, the other one goes to Twitch. Go ahead, throw me a follow on Twitch, and of course, join the Discord server as well. So, Sultai combo is based around well, Neoform Atraxa. It's based around the card Neoform, which I will scroll down farther to because for some reason Goldfish does not like me. So Neoform is a card that came out in War of the Spark. Whereas additional cost to cast the spell, you sacrifice a creature. Works almost exactly like Eldritch Evolution does, except that you have to find a creature card with mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost, and you put it on the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you shuffle the library. So essentially, Neoform is taking whatever creature, and it's basically potting it away, and it comes into play with a +1/+1 counter. Uh, Birthing Pod, notably a card that you sacrifice a creature and then you get a creature with mana value like +1 of the creature's converted mana cost. So you have cards like Soulflayer, which is a 6 mana card with Delve, and then you have Tasker, which is a 6 mana card with Delve, and well, they're both 6 mana cards with Delve. And you essentially use Neoform to get these idiots out of here. I mean, yeah, to get these idiots out of here, uh, to go get Atraxa. And Atraxa is keyword soup, flying vigilance, death touch, lifelink. It's a 7/7, and when it enters, you reveal the top 10 cards of your library, and then for each card type, you put one card of that type into your hand, and the rest go on the bottom of your library in a random order. So essentially, you're just trying to get Soulflayer or Tasker on the battlefield as soon as possible, and Neoform it away to get an Atraxa, dump your hand into play. Of course, it's an 8/8 Vigilance, Lifelink, Death Touch, flying. So really, it's not going to be interacting, or like your opponent's not really going to be able to interact with it in combat. And with like a 16-point life swing every turn, you know, with you dealing 8 damage and then you gaining 8 life, it's very hard for aggressive decks to win the game simply for the fact like they're just not going to beat you gaining a life a turn and then also you pressuring their life total. Also, like super hardcore, like even if your opponent is able to get rid of it, like the turn that you get it out, you end up drawing an absurd amount of cards, you know, and just basically getting to work towards like rebuilding and neoforming again into like an Atraxa and things like that. Um, there's also like the backup plan of like Soulflayer. So like Soulflayer is a weird card. I believe that originally came out in like Fate Reforged. That you know, whenever you if a creature with flying was exiled with Soulflayer's Delve ability, as flying, same is true for first strike, double strike, death touch, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, reach, trample, and vigilance. And that's basically where the Zatalpa comes into play because it has a flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, and indestructible. You could also, you know, get rid of like the Atraxa and you end up getting like Death Touch and Lifelink on top of that. So if you have like a Death Touch, Lifelink, Flying, Double Strike, Vigilance, Trample, Indestructible creature, Soulflayer is like basically impossible to get rid of. You know, you have to have like Exile based removal or something like that to actually deal with the Soulflayer. So you do have like this kind of like weird backup plan where like even if your opponent answers the Atraxa, you have Soul Flares like a backup just to take these keywords and pressure your opponent that way. So obviously the game plan, as I've just explained that, you're trying to get these Delve creatures into play, which means we need to put cards in the graveyard. One way to do it is card Otherworldly Gaze. You look at the top 3 cards, you put any number of them into the graveyard, the rest back on top of your library in any order. This kind of pulls double duty with, you know, putting cards in the graveyard and obviously putting Otherworldly Gaze. You could have 4 cards in your graveyard on turn 1. and essentially set up like Soul Flare like on turn 2 and just play like a giant Soul Flare. Uh, Also on top of that, having a Neoform, set up as well. You can also flash it back, and again like do the same thing, continue to fill your graveyard, and so on. Uh, Pretty neat. Pretty good. Like it definitely like the fact that you have a pseudo card advantage spell that will do it for you. Like do both halves for you. Like find combo pieces in the form of like putting a Neoform on top of your deck, or maybe like a Soulflare or a Tasker, so you're able to actually go off essentially with this deck. Uh, Also, you have stubborn denials because all of your creatures have 4 power, 4 or more power. So like this, a lot of the time, just gets to be a 1 mana negate. You have thought seizes to mess with like what your opponent's doing, and some of the other combo decks. On top of that, like you could, in theory, like thought seize yourself to get an Atraxa or a Zapulta out of your hand, so you can cast a Soul Flare. That'll be very menacing to deal with. You have Grizzly Salvage, and in sort of kind of an unintuitive way, Collective Brutality, where Brutality is going to give you a bonus of getting to select more modes by discarding cards from your hand, and in turn, like fueling your delve threats. While Grizzly Salvage will essentially like help you find the creature, Soulflare or Tasker, or maybe find like another land so you're able to continue to like cast your spells and stuff, and then putting a bunch of cards in the graveyard, essentially meaning that you will be able to then later delve for the Soulflare or Tasker that you found, or a future one should it come up. Of course, we went over Neoform, which is kind of like the linchpin of the deck to cheat out this Atraxa. I mean, like the fact that like on turn 3 you could have Atraxa Grand Unifier in play is super daunting. Um, Unless your opponent like plays Liliana, in that case, like they kind of got you. But they're also playing Liliana, so who's really the winner? Founding of the Third Path. I actually never even seen this card. Like, never really like read it honestly. So it has read ahead, so you can basically choose what chapter it goes on, and then of course you sacrifice it in the third chapter. Chapter 1 says you can cast an sorcery spell with mana value 1 or 2 from your hand without paying its mana cost. This is the first chapter. All of your spells are 2 or less, so you more than likely will get to play Founding of the Third Path, and then get to like Grizzly Salvage or something like that. The second chapter, target player mills 4 cards, more than likely milling yourself. And then number 3, you exile target instant card from your graveyard, copy it. You may cast the copy. So essentially giving you like an effect where, if you milled a Neoform and you have a Delve creature in play, you can just cast a Neoform, or if you need to continue digging, you can go for Salvage, maybe Otherworldly Gaze. Salvage obviously being the better one because you're going to look at more cards and have more of a chance of finding some of your Delve threats. Or just milling like Zapulta and playing like a giant Soul Flare. Again, like this deck definitely has some decent like moving parts for the fact that I'm sure a lot of this deck started out as like, hey, how do we get Atraxa into play as soon as possible? And it's kind of going in this avenue where like, well, there's another threat in the deck that you can get out like super early, and it just ends up being a total mess and a nightmare for your opponents to deal with. So you kind of have like this plan A2 of just giant, or not even like a giant Soul Flare, but just like playing a Soul Flare, and it just has a bunch of keywords and it's hitting for 8 every turn, you're gaining 8 life, so on. Sort of kind of like Atraxa after you like Neoform for it. The mana base, special things like you have Beseiju in here, you have 1 Otawara, 4 mana Confluence so that you can obviously have like the different mana values. I mean, you have like single blue, but then you also need like black on like turn 2 to like be able to play like Tasker or like Soul Flares and things like that, or double black for like Soul Flares to actually be able to cast them, and then also have like green blue for Neoform, but green black for Grizzly Salvage and so on. So having cards like Mana Confluence and these other like dual lands are super important for the deck. I'm actually surprised to see like there's like Watery Grave, and that's probably one of your more important. Just having black and blue on like turn 1, so then you can like go get an Overgrown Tomb turn 2, and then be able to salvage and so on, whatever. But uh, definitely interesting that there is a Watery Grave and 4 mana Confluence, but then you have like one of the other like Shock lands, and then a bunch of these fast lands and stuff. Um, Looking at the sideboard, you get Duresses, Ray of Enfeeblement for some of the, mono white being really popular. Fatal Push, another card again that kind of comes in for mono white. You have Duresses against like Control. That definitely a way that you can like lose a game is if your Neoform gets countered, or even just getting like a removal spell out of your opponent's hand for like your Atraxa, or your Soul Flayer if they're able to actually like exile the Soul Flayer if you get Zapalta exiled with it. Aether Gust, getting rid of some of the stuff from like the mono green deck. Terra Sunder, just getting to be a disenchant on the front half, or I guess for 2, and then for kicker you just get to straight up exile a target non-land permanent instead. Kind of a way that you can combat like the mirror in a way. Glissa Sunslayer, letting you get to draw cards. If it deals damage to your opponent, draw cards, destroy an enchantment, remove the 3 counters from target permanent. Basically like a mini questing beast type effect where like you could hit your opponent and then get 3 counters off your opponent's planeswalkers, maybe shrink your opponent's creatures, and so on. And 2 Mystical Dispute to mess with some of the counterspell decks, because again, it is super brutal if you go to Neoform and you're just like down a card from the Neoform and you're also taking essentially a clock off the battlefield as well. When you do Neoform, obviously, if Tasker or Soulflayer is the only creature that you have in play, Stubborn Denials will not be turned on. Just so that matters, like, in case you get a thought like, well, I could do this and leave up Stubborn Denial. Stubborn Denial will not be a hard negate in doing that. So yeah, that's the Atraxa Neoform deck, and I think this might be a deck that shows up later in the week with me playing it, because I think this is actually really interesting, and I think this list in specific is really interesting for the fact that usually decks like this find a way to be like all in, and I think that this deck kind of like feeds into both plans rather than like the other one is like kind of like shoehorned into it. I really think that you just have games where like you can decide like, okay, we're making a giant Soul Flare or we're going to make an Atraxa, and I think both game plans can be executed very well and is able to kind of shift seamlessly if things change and one plan ends up becoming better than the other one from like the original and stuff. So definitely worth checking out. If anything, I'd imagine this deck is like super fun to play, and like if you just play a bunch of games and you get to Neoform on like turn 3 for like an Atraxa and get to leave up with Stubborn Denial at least once, or like Thoughtseize and then do it. Whatever, like just putting like a giant like Atraxa into play and like maybe your opponent just concedes the game to that seems really cool. So yeah, that is the Atraxa Neoform deck for Pioneer. Again, if you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing so you can see more Pioneer content as well as modern content and some other like guides and essay type videos and stuff like that. And again, follow the 2 links in the description of the video to join the Discord server, and throw me a follow on Twitch as well. That's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.